You are standing in the cereal aisle. Your 3-year-old is on the floor. Not sitting, melting. Boneless and furious in a way that seems almost theatrical. Except the tears are real, and the screaming is real, and every single person in that store has just looked at you. You said no to the box with a cartoon on it. The same box you said no to last Tuesday, and somehow, this Tuesday it has ended the world. You take a breath. You try the calm voice. You try the negotiating voice. Nothing. And then a stranger walks past and says, "Oh, what a cute little guy." And your child, your volcanic, inconsolable child, stops mid-scream, sniffles once, and says thank you in a voice that sounds almost normal. If you've ever experienced that specific whiplash, this video is for you. Most parents in that moment think one of two things. Either their child is manipulating them, turning the behavior on and off at will to get what they want, or they think there is something about their own parenting that is uniquely failing, that another parent would have handled this better, that the problem is somehow them. Both of those conclusions are understandable. Both of them are also wrong. The research on child development and the neuroscience of early childhood tell a completely different story about what is happening in that moment. One that will not only explain why your child seems to listen to everyone except you, but will also give you a clearer sense of what actually helps. By the end of this video, you will understand what is driving the behavior, why your presence specifically is triggering it, and what small shifts in your understanding can change the whole dynamic. Let's start with the brain. When your child is somewhere between 18 months and 6 years old, they are in one of the most intensive periods of brain construction in their entire life. The region doing most of the heavy lifting right now is the prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain responsible for regulating emotion, delaying impulse, and making decisions. Here is the important part. That region will not be fully developed until your child is somewhere in their mid-20s. At age 3, it is barely online. What this means in practical terms is that your child is not choosing to be irrational. They are running on a brain that does not yet have the hardware to do what you're asking it to do. What is online, fully and completely, is the amygdala, the brain's threat detection and emotional response center. When something feels wrong, frustrating, scary, or overwhelming to a young child, the amygdala fires fast. And because the prefrontal cortex is not yet strong enough to put the brakes on, the emotional response goes from 0 to full intensity in a way that genuinely cannot be stopped by willpower. Your child is not refusing to calm down. Their brain is flooded. And flooding is a physiological state, not a choice. There is also something called the stress response system, specifically the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which governs the release of cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. When a child is dysregulated, cortisol spikes, heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, and the body enters something very close to a survival state. Learning, reasoning, and listening all shut down during this process because the brain has redirected its resources to managing the perceived threat. The threat, in this case, is the cereal box. The brain does not know the difference. Now here is where your relationship specifically comes in. There is a concept in developmental psychology called attachment, first mapped by psychiatrist John Bowlby, and later built upon extensively by researchers like Mary Ainsworth. The core idea is that children form a deep biological bond with their primary caregivers, usually parents, and that this bond functions as an emotional safe harbor. When children feel threatened, overwhelmed, or uncertain, the attachment system activates. They move toward the people they are most bonded to for regulation and safety. This is why your child's most extreme behavior happens with you. You are not seeing the worst of your child in spite of your relationship. You are seeing it because of your relationship. When the amygdala fires and the stress response spikes, your child's brain turns toward the attachment figure, you, to co-regulate. Co-regulation is the process by which one nervous system, yours, helps stabilize another, your child's. Infants literally cannot self-regulate at all. Toddlers can barely do it. The capacity for self-regulation is built, slowly, through thousands of co-regulation experiences over the first several years of life. So when your child dissolves in front of you and holds it together for the stranger, they are not manipulating you. They are activating their deepest survival system in the presence of the one person they trust to handle it. Here is what this behavior looks like from the outside versus what it actually is. The first misread is the manipulation interpretation. It is an easy one to land on, because the on-off quality of the meltdowns can seem almost calculated. Your child is screaming and then someone new walks in and they pull themselves together. From a distance, that looks like control. It looks like your child knew how to stop the whole time and was just choosing not to. But what is actually happening is that the arrival of a neutral person temporarily interrupts the dysregulation cycle. There is a small neurological reset that comes with novelty and mild social engagement, a brief activation of curiosity, which is a different brain state than threat. Your child is not performing for you. They are responding automatically to a change in their environment, and the moment that novelty fades, or the moment the stressor returns, they will dissolve again. That is not manipulation, that is developmental neuroscience. The second misread is the defiance interpretation. When a child repeatedly refuses a request, put your shoes on, come to the table, stop hitting your sister, it can read as deliberate opposition. The word parents often use is stubborn, and this framing is completely understandable because from an adult perspective, the requests are simple. The child has done these things before. They know how. So when they resist, it looks like a choice not to comply. What the research shows, though, is that compliance requires executive function, the cognitive ability to hold a goal in mind, shift attention from what you are currently doing, and initiate a new behavior. Executive function lives in the prefrontal cortex, the region that is still under construction. When a child is already in a heightened state, excited, frustrated, absorbed in play, their available executive function is further reduced because the emotional regions of the brain are consuming the bandwidth. Asking a dysregulated child to just do it is the neurological equivalent of asking someone running a fever to solve a math problem. The capacity is genuinely diminished. The third misread is the parenting failure interpretation, and this one is worth sitting with for a moment because it tends to be the most painful. Many parents watching the grocery store scene wonder what they did wrong. They see other children who seem calmer, more compliant, easier. They remember moments where they lost their patience and wonder if that is why their child is like this. The research does not support the idea that meltdowns are caused by parenting failures. Meltdowns in young children are developmentally expected. The frequency, duration, and intensity of emotional outbursts correlate strongly with a child's age and temperament, not with their parents' skill level. Children with highly reactive temperaments will have bigger meltdowns regardless of how patient and consistent their parents are. What parenting does influence is not the presence of big emotions, but how quickly a child can return to a regulated state, and that is a much slower process than it looks. The research on this is clearer and more reassuring than most parents realize. The first body of work that matters here comes from attachment theory and the concept of the secure base. Ainsworth's strange situation experiments in the 1970s showed that toddlers with secure attachments, meaning they had a caregiver who was consistently available and responsive, explored more freely, recovered from distress more quickly, and were more cooperative overall. The key word is consistently, not perfectly. Secure attachment does not require a parent who never loses patience or never makes mistakes. It requires a parent who is reliably present and who, after a rupture, repairs the relationship. The repair is actually a crucial part of how children learn that relationships are resilient and that their emotions will not destroy the people they love. Your child melting down at you is a sign that they know you can hold it. That is the attachment system working exactly as designed. The second area of research is co-regulation, and this is where the practical stakes are highest. Studies by developmental psychologist Ed Tronick, particularly the still face experiment, demonstrated how profoundly a caregiver's emotional state affects a child's nervous system in real time. In the experiment, mothers were asked to suddenly go expressionless. No reaction, no mirroring, no responsiveness. Within seconds, toddlers became distressed, confused, and eventually dysregulated. The moment the mother resumed normal interaction, The child's distress decreased rapidly. What this tells us is that your nervous system, your body language, your tone of voice, and your level of calm or panic are being read continuously by your child's brain. When you escalate, their system escalates. When you regulate, their system has something to match. This is not about being a robot or suppressing your own emotions. It is about understanding that you are functioning as an external regulator for a child who does not yet have a fully internal one. The third finding comes from research on executive function and the zone of proximal development, a concept introduced by developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky. The zone of proximal development is the space between what a child can do on their own and what they can do with support. In terms of emotional regulation, this means that a child cannot calm down entirely on their own, but they can calm down with a regulated adult nearby. The practical implication is that presence and calm are more useful than instruction in a moment of dysregulation. Telling the flooded child to take a breath is outside their zone of proximal development. Sitting nearby, breathing yourself, without demands, pulls them into range. The fourth area is sensory processing. A significant body of research, including work building on occupational therapist A. Jean Ayres' sensory integration theory, shows that children vary widely in how their nervous systems process sensory input. Some children have lower thresholds for sensory overwhelm, meaning that a crowded grocery store with fluorescent lights, competing sounds, and the physical sensation of hunger or tiredness is already pushing their system close to threshold before the cereal box ever becomes an issue. The meltdown is rarely just about the thing it looks like. It is about the accumulated load the child's nervous system has been carrying for the past hour, or the past day. The cereal box is the last small weight on a scale that was already tipping. Your child is in the back seat of the car. You are 10 minutes from home. They have been at daycare for 8 hours. You ask how their day was, and they say nothing, or they say fine. And then 3 minutes later, they are crying because their sock is touching their foot wrong. You might feel a flicker of irritation. You just want a normal conversation. You have been looking forward to seeing them, and instead, you are getting a meltdown about a sock. Here is what is actually happening. Your child has spent the entire day in a sustained state of self-management. They were regulated in a social environment. They followed instructions, sat at circle time, navigated peer conflict, held it together. That takes an enormous amount of the limited executive function and regulation capacity they have available. By the time they see you, the system is depleted. The sock is not the problem. You are the safe place where the depletion finally shows up. A response that helps looks like lowering your voice and saying, "Yeah, that sounds really annoying," without trying to solve it. A response that escalates looks like, "It's just a sock, you're fine," which is probably true and also completely beside the point to a nervous system running on empty. Your child is playing with their blocks. You tell them it is time for dinner. They do not move. You say it again. Still nothing. You say their name. Louder. They cry and knock the blocks over. From the outside, this looks like defiance. From the inside, your child is in a state of deep focus. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi would describe it as flow, and children enter this state more readily and deeply than adults do. Shifting out of flow requires activating the prefrontal cortex, which has to override the limbic system's investment in the current activity. Doing that cold, with no warning, is cognitively hard. A response that helps is a 2-minute warning, then a 1-minute warning, not because it teaches time management, but because it gives the brain a small ramp rather than a cliff. A response that escalates is demanding immediate compliance, which puts the child's brain in a conflict between the attachment to you and the neurological cost of transition. Your child is at a birthday party. They are warm, chatty, laughing following every instruction from the party host without argument. On the way home they are rude to you. They snap when you ask if they had fun. You feel a small hurt. You took them there, you watched them be wonderful, and now this. Here again is the attachment system. They gave their cooperative energy to the social environment, because social environments require it. You get the raw version because you are safe. This is not disrespect exactly. It is the closest thing a 4-year-old has to trust. A response that helps is just letting the transition happen, without taking the temperature of the relationship right then, putting on music, keeping conversation light or absent, giving the system time to decompress. A response that escalates is asking what is wrong or pointing out the contrast, which tends to amplify the mood rather than diffuse it. Your child wakes up at night. They are frightened by something. A dream, a sound, the dark. They call for you, not the other parent, not a sibling, not anyone else. And when you arrive, they are inconsolable for a few minutes before they settle. The inconsolability is not about the fear specifically. It is about the activation of the attachment system, which needs time to complete its arc once it has been triggered. The amygdala fires, cortisol spikes, and the child reaches for you. Your arrival does not immediately switch the system off. It begins a process that takes several minutes to resolve because the hormonal cascade takes time to clear. A response that helps is staying without trying to rush the resolution. The "you're okay, go back to sleep" approach is accurate and also physiologically premature. A response that escalates is showing frustration at the length of time it takes, which reactivates the stress response and extends the whole cycle. The most useful shift you can make does not involve a new system or a new script. It involves a small but meaningful change in what you are looking for when the hard moment arrives. Right now, when the meltdown happens, the instinct is to look at the behavior and try to stop it, which makes complete sense because the behavior is loud and visible and disrupting everything. But the behavior is a signal, not the actual problem. The next time it happens, try looking past the behavior to the state. Ask yourself not what is my child doing, but what is my child's nervous system currently running? Are they flooded, exhausted, overstimulated in transition, hungry, depleted from a day of holding it together? The answer does not excuse the behavior, but it changes your response from reactive to deliberate, and deliberate is where your influence actually lives. The second shift is about the word why. Parents often ask, "Why are you acting like this in the middle of a meltdown?" And the question tends to escalate rather than help, partly because it requires verbal reasoning from a brain currently offline for verbal reasoning, and partly because it signals that something needs to be explained or justified before comfort is available. Consider replacing "Why are you doing this?" with an observation instead. Something like, "You seem really upset right now." You are not conceding anything. You are not agreeing that the cereal box was a good reason for a meltdown. You are simply naming the state, which research on emotional labeling, particularly work from neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman, shows actually reduces activation in the amygdala. Naming the feeling does not validate the cause of the feeling. It helps regulate the system. The third shift is about proximity over instruction. When a child is flooded, the most powerful thing in your toolkit is not the right words. It is your regulated nervous system, present and close. You do not have to say anything particularly wise. Sitting near your child, not demanding, not lecturing, just being a calm presence, that is co-regulation. It is not passivity, it is applying the correct tool for the current brain state. Instructions and consequences are effective when the prefrontal cortex is online. When it is not, what the system needs is a regulated other to borrow regulation from. The fourth shift is about repair rather than resolution. Not every meltdown needs to be fully processed or talked through afterward, but there is value in a small, low-stakes reconnection once the storm has passed. Not a debrief, not a lesson, just a moment of warmth that tells your child's nervous system the relationship is intact. That was a hard moment. Want to read something together. The repair matters not because it teaches anything specific, but because it builds the neural understanding that ruptures are survivable and that the relationship is larger than the conflict. Consider, too, that the moments when your child seems to perform their worst behavior in front of you are not evidence that you are failing. They are evidence that your child's attachment system is functioning. They are bringing you the thing they cannot carry alone because you are the person they have learned can hold it with them. That reframe does not make the grocery store floor easier in the moment, but it changes the meaning of the moment, and meaning is where exhaustion can start to shift towards something closer to understanding. You are standing in the cereal aisle. Your 3-year-old is on the floor. You said no to the box with the cartoon on it, and the world has ended again. This time, though, Something is different in your head, not in your child's behavior. The meltdown is exactly the same. But you know what you are looking at now. You are looking at a prefrontal cortex that is not yet built, at an amygdala doing exactly what amygdalas do, at a stress response system that has been accumulating load since morning. You are looking at a child whose attachment system has activated and turned toward you because you are the safe place. The meltdown is not about you failing. It is about your child trusting you completely with something they cannot yet manage alone. So you do something small. You lower yourself to their level. You do not launch into an explanation, or a consequence, or a negotiation. You say, "I know, it's really hard," in a voice that is quieter than you feel. And you wait. It takes a few minutes. The stranger still walks past. Your child still glances up and sniffles. But the recovery comes a little faster, because the landing was softer. You will not do this perfectly every time. Nobody does. But you understand now what the behavior is telling you, and that understanding is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the only thing that actually changes anything.